When the Romans came to Britain, they came to a land as alien to them as Africa was to the British colonists, or China to Marco Polo. As Joseph Conrad wrote, this has also been one of the dark places of the earth. A land full of strange customs and practices, a people apart, a frightening step into the unknown for the conquering invader. We do not know today what these extraordinary structures mean, any more than the Romans did when they broke through the dense forest and first set eyes on them. We are left only with a fragment of the picture, but it is enough to make us marvel. Many of these clues to our past are memorials to the dead, for these are the Isles of the Dead. Behind the high street shops, the identical town centres from north to south, behind this recently acquired facade lies century upon century of lives lived, of conflict and intrigue, endless comedies and tragedies played out by the great, the noble, and the perfectly ordinary. Even the characters that populated the past refuse to go away, for this is the haunted realm, the land of the ghost story. There is so much in Britain that is not drab and uniform, but enchanting and mysterious. There are plenty of perfectly rational people, for instance, who will tell you that not 600 miles from London lurks a prehistoric dinosaur. This film is an exploration and a celebration of mysterious Britain. In our modern world, there is the town where most people live, and there is the countryside where most people used to live. But this picture postcard landscape is more than just a pastoral idyll. It contains the vital clues to the understanding of our ancient past. Why, for instance, was this strapping fellow dug into the hillside above the village of Cerne Abbas in Dorset? Who thought these rather lewd figures would be appropriate in a church? And what are these people doing? Such mysterious sights are not so unusual in Britain. What is unusual is the fact that nobody really understands them. When the Romans invaded Britain in the 4th century AD, they found a system of belief based on the people's relationship to the land, a system that had evolved naturally over thousands of years. When the Romans sought to replace this with Christianity, they didn't have much success until the Pope realized that the best way to erase the existing religion was to appropriate the pagan holy days as Christian feast days and build churches on existing sacred sites. So it is that these incongruous sites greet us today, but not the reason for their existence. The monolith at Rudston is so heavy that it could not be shifted. So instead they built a church around it and created a legend that the monolith had been thrown at the church by the devil in a fit of jealousy. Similarly, strange tales surround the thousands of stone sites that survived Christianity. all the curiosities that would have greeted the Romans, it is the standing stones that are the most enigmatic and wondrous. Scattered throughout the country, these extraordinary symbols of Neolithic culture are thousands of years old. Yet at the end of the 20th century, despite our phenomenal scientific advances, we still do not really know why they were built. The most famous megalithic site in Britain is at Stonehenge. The circle was built over hundreds of years and is an astonishing engineering feat. Incredibly, the stones were not quarried locally. The nearest source for the blue stones in the middle of the circle is a mountain range in Wales, 240 miles away. The larger sarsen stones weigh 50 tons and were brought from 20 miles away. Modern dating systems confirm that Stonehenge is one of the most ancient man-made structures on Earth. But why was it built?
We assume as archaeologists that they were ceremonial, ritual, in inverted commas, religious structures, simply because they don't appear to be for defence, they don't appear to be for storing grain, they don't appear to be for growing stuff, they don't appear to have that kind of practical purpose.
Well, if we take a site like Stonehenge, the archaeological interpretation of that is based on caution. Basically, they don't know what a site like that was used for, and indeed nobody does. These things emerge from the remote past. They belong to people that had a different worldview to ourselves, so we can only interpret from our own position now. Certainly the evidence of Stonehenge is that there was a lot of astronomical association. The stones do seem to line up and give sun and moon lines, rising and setting points and so on.
Some of the travellers who watched the sunrise over the stones this morning had arrived during the night to be sure of getting close.
Even today, people are drawn to Stonehenge to celebrate key astronomical events like the summer solstice. But if Stonehenge is merely an astronomical observatory, why is it built on such a scale? To see the true scale of Neolithic construction, we must go to the nearby village of Avebury. Amazingly, the stone circle here went so unnoticed for centuries that a small village has grown inside it. John Aubrey, who rediscovered it in the 17th century, said that Avebury exceeds Stonehenge in grandeur, as a cathedral does an ordinary parish church. Some of the stones weigh up to 40 tons, and there are now 27 stones in the outer circle, where there were once 100. The stones mark the huge circular earth bank more than 400 meters in diameter, which could have held an audience of over 250,000 people. We do have a vision of what Avebury in its original conception looked like. Dr. William Stukeley found in the early 18th century that from the circle extended 2 avenues of stones, each one 1.5 miles long and 50 feet wide. Today only the so-called West Kennet Avenue remains. Stukeley saw this as a huge representation in the landscape of the sun and the serpent, symbols used together by many of the world's ancient cultures. A temple, perhaps, 3 miles long. And Avebury is part of a whole complex of monuments and sites. Nearby Silbury Hill is Europe's largest artificial mound. It would have taken 500 men 10 years to build, and like the pyramids, was designed to last indefinitely. To prevent it changing shape, it was lined with interior walls of chalk, but we have no idea why it was built. Like the rest of the Avebury complex, the sheer scale of the undertaking surely precludes a merely astronomical function. Stukeley saw something no one had seen for hundreds of years. The secrets of ancient history are engraved in the countryside, but it takes a rare vision to read them. 2 centuries after Stukeley, another distinguished man had a glimpse of the past. On a perfect summer's day in June 1921, a 65-year-old magistrate from Hereford named Alfred Watkins was out motoring in the countryside he loved. As he rested on top of a hill near Bredwardine and surveyed the scene, something extraordinary happened. In a moment of revelation, which he described as a flash of understanding, Watkins perceived that all the ancient sites and holy places were joined by straight lines in a long hidden network crisscrossing the country.
He suddenly realized that some of the ancient monuments marked on the map seemed to fall into line. So he started up his car, he drove rapidly back home, laid out the map on a table, pulled out a straight edge, and checked, and indeed he found that a lot of the old sites did fall into a line, linking stone circles, ancient mounds, earthworked hills, and so on and so forth. And over the following years, he developed the idea that these were actually the remnants of old, straight traders' tracks that had been laid down originally in prehistory.
Watkins called these lines lays, or ley lines. In his hometown of Hereford, he traced several lays in and around the town, including the Offer Street lay and the Dine Door lay. The second of these, as can be seen in this picture, runs through two churches, All Saints Church and Hereford Cathedral. It then lines up with an ancient hill fort called Dine Door Camp. As Watkins plotted more and more of these ley lines, it became evident to him that most ancient sites stand on a ley line. He concluded that in the time when Britain was heavily forested, people would have used these alignments to navigate from one place to another. The best known and most studied ley line in Britain is the St. Michael's line. It's an alignment of sacred sites which runs from Land's End in Cornwall right across the country to Suffolk on the east coast. Among the sites on the line are Avebury Circle, the Tor at Glastonbury, St. Michael's Church at Brentor, the Cheese Ring on remote Dartmoor, and the line ends at St. Michael's Mount off the south coast of Cornwall. Ley lines have invited more than their fair share of controversy. The points connected by a ley, for example, are very often not of the same historical era, so how could they deliberately fall in a line? Ley hunters argue that no matter how new a site, it is built where an ancient site stood. This is the argument of site evolution. Archaeologists are not keen.
What the argument presupposes is that you start off with a Neolithic site of some kind of religious importance that develops into one used in the Bronze Age, into the Iron Age, into the Roman period, into the pagan Saxon period, and then into the Christian period, all with structures occupying precisely the same site. It must be precisely the same site, otherwise it wouldn't line up on the ley line. And the evidence for that there isn't any evidence that it's true. So although there may be some churches which are on prehistoric sites, the suggestion that many, or as really the argument demands, the majority, is not true.
And with so many ancient sites dotting the countryside, is it so surprising that one can draw straight lines between some of them?
There are groups of alignments that I would agree with the archaeologists and the statisticians are purely chance. There are other alignments in a grey zone where nobody can generate the statistics to prove it one way or the other. And then there is another group of alignments that, when they've been tested statistically, have come out as beyond chance. And one classic case of this is the alignments that pass through the Devil's Arrows standing stones in Thornbury in Yorkshire and link up with henge monuments further along. And the statisticians have processed this alignment time and again, and it comes out as something many hundreds to one against chance. And any statistician would accept that as evidence of it being a deliberate alignment.
Alfred Watkins was not a mystically inclined man, but later in life he suspected that there was more to lays than ancient trade routes. It occurred to him that traders' tracks would go around mountains and lakes, and not, as lays do, straight through them. There are stories of people dancing around the stones to increase the fertility of the land, as if there was an interaction between humans and a force in the earth, a natural force, which we were able to tap into and mark where it was strongest. 30 years ago, ley lines became synonymous with the idea of energy, an earth energy, which is concentrated at the stones.
We've confirmed that some of these places do have magnetic or sometimes radioactive effects, natural radioactive effects. And we've also confirmed association with geological faulting and so on. So we've confirmed that there is a geophysical factor in the sighting of many ancient monuments.
Here, in a remote part of Cornwall, miles from civilization, is a stone called Menantol. There was a time when sick children were passed through the hole to be cured of rickets.
It is true that when you go through that hole, you go through a very low-level increase in background radiation. Now, these levels are very low. We're not talking 3 Mile Island or Sellafield or anything here. But there is research and there is evidence that low-level energies, low-level electrical fields and magnetic fields, and I suspect radiation fields also, radioactivity fields, can have a more marked effect on the living organism than tremendous effects which simply destroy the organism or fry it or whatever.
Is there then some significance to the precise location of these ancient sites?
You get a sort of force in the earth itself, which gives the impression of being a kind of vital force. It seems very often to be coiled like a spring or like a serpent. Hence, I think, this symbol that you find all over the world of this coiled spring representing earth forces. I believe that there's an enormous one at Stonehenge, with the Stonehenge altar as the centre of it.
For some people, this earth energy is a tangible reality.
The trouble about dowsing is it's terribly difficult to put into words precisely what one feels. There's an intuitive process goes on. It uses one of the senses beyond the normal 5. I think you just become sensitive to some range of frequencies that if you're not aware of them, nobody's in touch with. But they are all around us. It's only a question of jiggling part of your mind, I think, to become receptive to them.
For some odd reason, dowsers appear to be able to pick up this force. And this, in effect, means almost everyone, because in my experience, everyone does seem to be able to dowse, if they're shown how to do it in the proper way. The first time I went to the Merry Maidens near Penzance, the friend who was a very good dowser handed me his dowsing rod, which was just 2 bits of plastic tied together at the end with cotton, and I said, no, it's no good, it doesn't work for me, I can't do any of these things. And he said, show me how you hold it. So I showed him holding the dowsing rod. He said, no, look, twist the ends of the dowsing rod like that so it's like a spring. He said, now try it. And as I walked between the stones with the dowsing rod now like a spring prepared to go up or down, to my astonishment, the dowsing rod shot up as I got near the stone. And thinking I'd done it myself by changing the pressure on it, I went back again, and once again it shot up. And in the centre of the circle, it was extremely powerful. The dowsing rod was so powerful that I could not hold it down. This seems to me very interesting. Obviously, in some strange way, this force is going through the body, and yet you yourself consciously are not in the least aware of it.
And that's the outside edge of the line. And actually it comes from St Michael's Mount over there. On the right-hand side of the mount, there's a very, very powerful energy point. It comes right down through the hedges here and right up to that pile of rocks in the centre, which is the energy centre of this particular hill form, Trancron.
In 1987, Hamish Miller set out on a bold quest to dowse the entire length of the St Michael's line. He wanted to trace the path of the energy to which he is attuned to confirm the truth of the line. He was astonished to find that far from running straight as expected, the energy of the St Michael line is serpentine. After 18 months of dowsing, Miller finally reached Avebury.
We got up at dawn, and the two of us were there, nobody else around, and it was quite a unique experience actually, because we saw the sunrise at Beltane at Avebury. We walked down the Kennet Avenue following the Michael line, and we had found actually at the Michael line they had marked in stone the width and the river-like contour of the Michael line. And it was an absolute delight to us to have found that that's why the avenue was there. It was actually marking this energy flow.
Rightly or wrongly, ley lines are now synonymous with the notion of earth energy, an unquantified natural force which the human mind can interact with. In Neolithic times, when we were much more in touch with the land, the argument goes, we didn't need dowsing rods to interact with this force. Traditional ley hunters view the earth energy connection as misguided or worse.
As editor of the Ley Hunter magazine, I see literally over the years dozens and dozens of ideas of energy lines are sent to me. And all of them have their own characteristic quality about them because they've come out of somebody's mind. Each person thinks they've discovered the energy pattern. And it does not take too many years, unless you're a very slow learner, to realize that this is pure subjective fantasy. It's gone to the extreme in America where people are talking about lasers come down from outer space, go into the ground, turn at right angles, or run under the ground. Some of the leading energy dowsers believe this over there.
Paul Devereux looks at straight lines in the landscape as medieval death roads or ghost paths that are trace memories of archaic shamanic practice.
The shaman was the man or woman who went into the spirit world on behalf of the tribe. And the way the shaman went was to fly. It was a spirit journey into the other world. And we know from our own inquiries with Native Americans that these lines were seen as physical traces of spirit ways in the spirit world, in the spirit earth. In Europe we found the same thing, but disguised because there's been more layers of culturation in Europe than in the Americas. So you can go, for example, to Holland, to Hilversum, for example, and you'll find the Doodwagen, dead straight roads radiating out across the heathlands there, the death roads, that's what Doodwagen means. Here in Cornwall we have coffin lines, we have the same idea. And we're now pretty sure that what Alfred Watkins was picking up were really these medieval versions of these spirit paths and these spirit ways linking old churches.
With such a confusion of theories, sometimes it's best to step back and look at the broader picture. In China, the idea of lines of energy running across the country is a fixed reality. These currents of force have always been recognized as real and the most important consideration for deciding the site of a house or temple. The ideal place for a tomb, for instance, would be where two currents meet. These currents are called lung mei, or dragon paths, symbolized by the coiled serpent or dragon, the same symbols used by our pagan ancestors for their earth force. When the Chinese started trading with the world, they were amazed that Westerners paid no attention to where they sited buildings, for the Chinese assumed that their understanding of the earth force was universal knowledge amongst men. And many years ago, perhaps it was. Amidst the confusion of energy lines and earth forces, there remains the truth of the stones. These sentinels of the past still stand over the British landscape, a reminder of what Christianity covered up. There is a strange atmosphere at these ancient sites, as if the stones have absorbed the millennia of history they have witnessed. Whether their alignments are wishful thinking on the part of 20th century man, or careful planning by our ancestors, there is something here.
I think that in the case of temples and churches and so on, the place was quite deliberately chosen because the shamans or witch doctors of the tribe or whatever, recognized that here you had a tremendous concentration of this earth force, which they felt to be holy. This force in the ground itself tends to remain over the ages, so that in fact what were the cathedrals in the remote past have become the sites of churches and so on nowadays. And that the reason for this is simply that we recognize that in some strange way the ground can somehow record the human emotion which is put into it. In other words, what I'm saying is that what begins as what you might call crude earth force, crude magnetic force, is eventually altered by human beings themselves until what you've got is something extremely powerful hanging around in that place, a force for good.
Perhaps we should not be surprised that our ancient forefathers' beliefs and behavior might still affect us. This is amusing now, because its meaning is lost. Only the actions remain. But some of our ancestors' beliefs are still important. Why do we throw confetti at newlyweds? Or touch wood? The Roman invasion cut us off from our pagan past. Civilization has its price. But there are still glimpses of it in our landscape and in our performance of ancient rituals. Perhaps the past has a firmer hold on us than we imagine. Britain has a reputation for being the most haunted plot of land in the world. In these islands, history has staged so many battles and rivalries, era upon era, so many lives have unfolded, it is little wonder that the events and people of the past should weigh so heavily on the present. Travel through any hamlet or village, and you'll hear legends of restless spirits and wandering phantoms, black dogs and grey ladies. Britain is home to every shade of ghostly occurrence. Its great stately homes are, more often than not, said to be haunted. The stone corridors of its castles echo with the memories of their long and bloody history. But there are more modern hauntings too, like the lone hitchhiker who flags down an unsuspecting motorist, a silent companion at the beginning of the ride, for the phantom traveller has vanished before journey's end. This is the landscape of haunted Britain, and although we like to think we're alone in this world, that we've conquered the shadows, the experience of seeing ghosts touches a surprising number of people. We all know someone with a story to tell.
Well, we came here 23 years ago, and it was 6 months after. I was here one evening. I had just come to bed. I wasn't asleep. I was still wide awake, and I was sleeping over here. I had my little girl of 3 with me, and because the next day she was going to hospital to have her tonsils taken out, and I was just lying here thinking, well, what shall I take? And I just turned round, and there at the end of the bed was this lady, very pretty lady, in a white dress, just standing there. The dress was, she'd got ropes crisscrossed here, a rope round the middle, and a little square of silk or whatever, cotton maybe, round here at the back of her hair, and the blonde hair was hanging down. I saw that because she was looking down at my daughter, and my immediate reaction was, save my daughter. And I couldn't move though. I was absolutely paralysed.
We moved in 26 years ago. At the time my wife was expecting her first baby, and after about a week we heard crying in the evening. A young child, like they do late evening. We thought maybe it was one of the neighbours had children. But having checked with them, neither couple had any, and we were then told that the house might have been haunted. Now, it happened in the early hours of the morning. Our children used to come and stand by the bed if they wanted anything or weren't feeling well, and they would reach out and touch you until you woke up. This was exactly what Monica was doing. She was standing on my wife's side of the bed, reaching out for my wife. I saw her in the darkness and said to her, "Hold on while I turn over and put the light on." And as I turned over to put the light on, she disappeared into nothing.
Your head well down and your arms tucked in, you'll go down into the cellar.
I came down here when I was 18 to do some alterations to central heating here in Treasure's house. The difference between then and now is the floor where we're standing had been excavated, and it was the original Roman road. I had no interest at all in Roman history, and my job was to knock a hole through the ceiling here. It was just before lunchtime, just before 12 o'clock. I started to hear the sound of a musical note. I took no notice. I thought it'd be a radio in another part of the building. And at the time I was about 3 rungs up on a short ladder on the wall here. And then I realised the actual sound I could hear was coming from the wall. When I looked at the wall, it was a complete figure of a Roman soldier. Once he'd cleared the wall, then a horse started to come straight out of the wall, across the cellar and into the wall opposite here. Then the Roman soldiers came out of the wall in twos. They were side by side. Now, I didn't count them. I was in no fit state to count them, but I would say it was at least 20. I could hear the horse as it went across the cellar here. I could hear, not speech, but I could hear mumbling coming from the Roman soldiers. They were not like wisps of smoke. They were the same as you and I. They were solid.
It was the Victorians who first shone the light of scientific inquiry at the subject of the occult. For the first time, an official organization, the Society for Psychical Research, was established to investigate events that orthodox science could not explain.
The formation of the Society for Psychical Research in 1882 stemmed from the huge controversy that was created by the phenomenon of spiritualism, which came from America in the 1840s, and which was enormously controversial and enormously popular in England throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s of the last century. And it was, of course, replete with fraud and with unprovable assertion, but also with most extraordinary phenomena.
Spiritualists claimed that the soul survives the death of the body, and indeed by communicating with the soul that it is possible to contact the dead. The Society for Psychical Research was set up in reaction to this, and soon started looking at related phenomena, in particular ghosts and hauntings. In a comprehensive survey, the Society found that 10% of the population claimed to have seen a ghost. So, what is it that these millions are seeing?
I would say that where hauntings are concerned, there are basically 2 theories. The oldest and most basic theory, of course, is that what you're dealing with are spirits of the dead. The other theory, which was put forward for the first time in the 19th century, was what you might call the tape recording theory. This was basically due to the fact that in the 1840s, they suddenly discovered that it was possible for people to hold objects and somehow to be able to talk about the history of that object. They called it psychometry. They felt that if you could talk about the history of an object and see with great clarity what had happened to this object and what had happened to the people who'd owned it, then in a certain sense you were in touch with the past. And from this came the so-called psychometric theory of ghosts, in which the notion was that the ghost was a tape recording.
The tape recording theory suggests that a moment of extreme emotional crisis can imprint itself on the very fabric of a building, like a photograph or tape recording, and that this recording can then play itself back to an unwitting percipient, so that a haunting is a ghostly representation of some long-past tragedy. This explanation of the mechanism of a ghost fits many of the most frequently reported sightings. Haunted houses, for instance, often feature a ghost that does not seem conscious of its percipient. It's just seen performing set movements and actions, like pacing down a corridor, as if forever trapped in that moment and playing itself back time after time. When Harry Martindale saw a legion of Roman soldiers in a basement in York, he believes he saw a spectacular instance of a recording playing itself back to an unwitting observer. And when, a decade later, the nearby Minster was excavated, two striking facts made Martindale's sighting all the more remarkable. The remains of an enormous Roman fortress was discovered beneath the Minster. The main road into that fortress, which was marked by columns, was found to pass directly through the cellar of the Minster, but 3 feet below the floor. So, not only did Harry Martindale see the soldiers walking the exact path of that road, he also saw them only from the waist up, on the exact level of the Roman road. Few of us see anything as distinctive as a Roman legion on the march. For the most part, we can tell ourselves that what we have seen or heard was merely imagined, that it was all in the mind. But not always. The Society for Psychical Research investigates cases where the evidence points to paranormal phenomena. At Thetford in Norfolk, the Bell Inn, like many a small-town tavern, has a haunted history. The focus for this paranormal activity is Room 10, which is at the end of a long Elizabethan corridor. The room is frequently used as a honeymoon suite, and guests who have spent the night in Room 10 have reported hearing disembodied footsteps which creak down the corridor and enter the room. Sometimes a girl in Elizabethan costume appears at the end of the bed and watches over them. One guest said this figure looked remarkably like a youthful Elizabeth Radcliffe, whose portrait hangs downstairs. Elizabeth Radcliffe owned the hotel 300 years ago and died in tragic circumstances. If you're hunting ghosts, this is a good place to set a trap.
With any investigation these days, what we're trying to really do is prove to ourselves and other people with electronic equipment or any equipment that there are such things as ghosts. I mean, some people argue, of course, that it's all in the mind. Well, it may well be. But even if it's all in the mind, some of the information that people have had from ghosts in the past make it an interesting study. But the basic thing is to come to a room like this, where there's been previous experiences of people seeing things and hearing things, and hope that it happens, and record it with instrumentation, the kind of stuff we've got, so that we know that it's what we call veridical, real, a confirmation that what people say is happening is actually happening.
Veridical evidence which would demonstrate that ghosts are more than imagined means capturing a ghost on film, video, or audio tape, so that others can see what we have seen. Some photographs do show shadowy figures, usually only discovered after the film has been processed, but an ambiguous image can easily be confused with something more mysterious. For those who seek empirical evidence, ghosts have so far proved an elusive quarry.
Now, there have been claims that people have got photographs of ghosts, but on close examination you generally find a very normal explanation. It will reveal a lot if we do get it. It will reveal, for instance, that it is a physical object. It's got to be a physical object to be photographed. It's got to reflect light, just as your eyesight and my eyesight works that way.
But often, it's what people hear as much as what they see which leads them to believe that they have had some kind of paranormal experience.
To the extent to which the ghosts make knocking noises, which they very often do, this can be recorded, and the assumption must be that since a noise is a vibration, a movement of air, however small, there's some physical interaction between the external ghost and its capacity to move things and what people see. In other words, it's not totally subjective. Now, this has been done. I mean, there have been quite a number of recordings by people who sit up night after night waiting for ghosts, and occasionally ghosts appear.
village of Borley lies on the border between the counties of Suffolk and Essex. During the latter part of the last century, it was the site of a spate of terrifying hauntings. Borley Rectory became known as the most haunted house in England. The Ball family lived here for 65 years and suffered every type of paranormal experience, including visitations from a ghostly nun and phantom handwriting that would appear on the walls. The rectory burned down in mysterious circumstances in 1939, and much controversy surrounded the building, but it's undoubted that many strange things did happen here. Stranger still, that it is now the church that brings the name of Borley to the lips of ghost hunters. In the 1970s, a team of paranormal investigators spent the summer monitoring Borley Church. Their aim was to witness and record anything out of the ordinary. The leader of the investigation describes what happened in an extract from a recording released shortly after the investigation finished.
We then locked 2 cassette machines into the church, one by the altar and the other at the opposite end of the building by the main door. And then we sealed the church and kept a watch around it for the next half an hour. It was during this period the ghost decided to make its presence known, and to our utter astonishment we recorded the sound of it opening a door, but a door which doesn't exist.
The following sound occurred 10 minutes later. The sound appeared to be coming from the area of the altar, and yet the floor there is made of stone. This last recording was made in the very early hours of the morning. The recording here ends with an utterly chilling sound. This sigh, so human and so tormented, seems a plea from what we might term an unquiet spirit. Perhaps there is more to paranormal experience than the unconscious repetition of some long-past event.
I believed for a long time in the tape recording theory of ghosts, until when I was writing my book Mysteries, I talked to somebody in our local little village, Mevagissey, who'd had a ghost of an old man in the place they occupied immediately after they got married. And when I said it was a tape recording, they said, oh no, you know, we were aware of him, he was aware of us, he was a nice old man and we didn't mind him in the least. And I said, but did he ever give you the impression of knowing you were there? They said, oh yeah, you know, you actually looked in his eyes and, you know, something went between you. And it was then that I suddenly began to realize that in certainly many cases, ghosts do appear to be earthbound spirits.
The Borley investigators then went on to Bircham Newton, an aerodrome in Norfolk that had been an operational airfield in the First and Second World Wars. These squash courts are said to be haunted by a dead airman. When the investigators moved in, they set up their recording equipment inside Court 2, and they recorded sounds reminiscent of a hangar in wartime. Incredibly, they picked up the roar of a twin-prop aeroplane overhead when there were no aircraft in the area. Using a well-known psychic named John Sutton as a medium, the investigator was able to record this exchange with the dead airman.
I can hear you, yes. Tell us what happened. Hmm? Tell us what happened. Fire? The plane caught fire? And it crashed? Yes. Dusty Miller. Dusty Miller. Pat Sullivan. Yes. Jerry Arnold. Cherry Arnold? Jerry Arnold. Jerry Arnold. Help us. What can we do? Help us.
When I was asked to write a book about life after death, and did so rather reluctantly, as soon as I began to study this, I suddenly began to realize that there appears to be as much evidence for life after death as there are for atoms and electrons, in which case I think you have to take account of the strong possibility that what you are dealing with in many of these cases is a genuine ghost. In many cases, in fact, somebody, a so-called earthbound spirit, somebody who's died, very often violently in an accident or something of the sort, and who doesn't realize that they're dead.
We did go through the history of the house with a friend of ours, Madge, and we asked her if she knew anything about previous owners, and she said she knew about a little girl named Monica who was kept shut in the back bedroom because she was hydrocephalic and retarded, and Victorians tended to shut children like that away. And she knew that she had died at about the age of 8 or 9. And when Tim saw a ghostly appearance by the bed one night, he described it to Madge, and she said that sounds exactly like Monica.
Even down to the ringlets and the big bow, which was to hide the slightly deformed head.
Everything and anything I've seen in this room has always come from that corner, a little light, and it seems to take ages to get from there to here. And when it gets near me on the bed here, it either zooms round to one side or the other side, or stops here. Like, for instance, I think it was about 8 years ago now, the light came from there, stopped, hovered here for a second, swung round there, and there was suddenly a fat gentleman in Victorian clothes. He had curly hair, huge stomach, white balloon blouse, waistcoat, big belt round here, and he was just standing there laughing at me.
Janet Martinez lives next door to Guy's Cliff Manor, ancient home to many a noble family and scene of much intrigue and heartache over the centuries. Her research indicates that the apparitions she sees are historical figures who lived here, in particular the doomed lover of the Earl of Warwick, who leaped to her death from the highest casement. Ghosts do seem to exist, or at least be a part of the human experience, but they are a discrepancy which orthodox science cannot accept. And when science fails to provide the answers, it's science that must change, for the questions will not go away.
I think that the present desire of science to try to wrap up the universe neatly in terms of quarks and all the rest of it, and have a total scientific theory of the universe, is a delusion. There are some things involved in the realm of the paranormal that simply cannot be taken into science. There's no possible way.
I think once they have recognized, in the face of more and more overwhelming evidence, that they cannot any longer continue to hold to their paradigm, they've got to extend their horizon to take the paranormal into account so that it becomes an acceptable part of scientific inquiry. Then there will be, I think, a paradigm shift, if you like. Then we will recognize that the five senses and materialism is simply not adequate to explain what is happening in the world and what's going on inside our minds.
My personal view is that I think that when the answers we've yet to discover.
For nearly 100 years, people have been asking the question, could there be a dinosaur in Scotland?
I am firmly convinced that there is something quite abnormal in the depths of the loch. It is capable of quite extraordinary speed. It must be of immense proportions.
There was a long neck coming out about 6 feet out of the water, and its head reminded me rather of a horse. The body was about 30 to 40 feet long.
I was out rowing in the middle of the loch. Without any warning, the boat started to heave underneath me. It was terrifying. It was the only time I've ever felt frightened on this loch in the whole of my life.
It must have been travelling about 15 knots. The length of the part we saw was about 20 feet. The wake it created caused our boat to rock violently. It was without doubt a living creature.
Loch Ness rips deep across Scotland and contains more fresh water than all the rivers and lakes of the British Isles put together. 23 miles long, 1 mile wide, 900 feet deep, its waters are rich in peat and terribly murky. A few feet down there is a darkness so total that professional scuba divers emerge shaking with fear. It is the perfect hiding place. There have been sightings of strange creatures in Loch Ness for at least 1400 years, since St. Columba sent a beast on its way in 565. But the sightings were by local people who kept themselves to themselves in the crofters' huts and quiet villages around the loch. For centuries, the secret of the loch was a local story. But in 1933, the Loch Ness phenomenon took off. A new road was built around the loch, allowing a clear view of the water, and sightings by excited motorists came in thick and fast. One of the most extraordinary stories was that of an English couple, the Spicers, who were driving by the loch in July when they were confronted by the spectacle of a 30-foot-long, undulating creature crossing the road. Mr. Spicer was moved to describe this as a loathsome sight. In a world racked by economic depression, with the spectre of Nazism rising in Europe, this story was the perfect antidote, and it sparked a media frenzy. News crews rushed up to Scotland, and the creature in the loch gained a name.
Crosses on this diagram reveal where it is stated that the monster has been most frequently seen in the past. The arrowheads indicate where it has been seen on the road and shore. And this is the point our cameramen were stationed at when, after a long and arduous vigil, they actually filmed it. For through our telescopic lenses, we saw the grey waters suddenly heave as the monster cut through them with lightning speed.
This unconvincing footage was branded as proof of the monster's existence. Not a day passed without a new angle to the story. Even the Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, was reported to be planning a trip to the loch to see the monster for himself. And this gigantic housing was constructed to put the creature in, should it ever be captured.
Must be near the Great Cave.
Tales told by divers of deep underwater caves in the loch inspired a feature film, shot on location, which recollected some of the stories of the time. coincided with the earliest scientific attempts at classification of the creature, which described it as a giant amphibian. Loch Ness quickly became Britain's #1 tourist attraction. There was a real carnival atmosphere as this extraordinary story dominated the headlines. Then, as quickly as it had blown up, the story blew over, precipitated by the bold claims of a big game hunter. What he declared to be the footprints of the monster itself turned out to be caused by nothing more mysterious than an umbrella stand. But if the attention of the world's press was diverted by dark rumblings abroad, the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster have continued right to this day. A body of photographs has built up, many taken by respectable men and women. One of the most striking was taken by a bank manager, Mr. McNabb, as he was about to take a snapshot of Castle Urquhart in 1955.
There was a calm, warm, hazy afternoon when my attention was held by a movement in the calm water over to the left. Some black or dark, enormous water creature was cruising on the surface.
Some of the best pictures are inevitably faked. The most famous of all Nessie images is known as the surgeon's photograph because it was taken by an eminently reputable doctor and army colonel. This is the archetypal image of Nessie embedded in most people's minds, what seems to be a long-necked dinosaur. Unfortunately, 50 years on, the surgeon has proved unreliable. The true scale of this monster is evident when we see the whole picture. The best photograph of Nessie is actually a model mounted on a toy submarine from Woolworths. Adrian Shine has been involved in scientific research at the Loch for the last 20 years, and his view of the photographic evidence is that it's undermined by its very lack of consistency.
It's interesting that these classic pictures, they're all different. And so to an investigator, they are actually quite fruitless in that they are all different. They can't obviously all be, real pictures of the same animal. And there's no real point in arguing about whether any of them are genuine, because there is substantial evidence that the best-known pictures are manipulated. The surgeon's photograph is one. The original negative of the McNabb picture has disappeared. There are suggestions that it's a process of rephotography of some description. The Lackland Stewart picture of the angular humps turned out to be tarpaulin-covered hay bales.
For the skeptic, only filmed evidence might convince. In 1960, an aeronautical engineer by the name of Tim Dinsdale came to the Loch armed with a cine camera, not on a whim, but as part of a methodical, thought-out strategy. On April the 23rd, on the last day of his stay at the Loch, he was driving back to his hotel when he saw something in the water. Somehow managing to remain calm, he then shot this extraordinary film.
I knew Tim Dinsdale quite well, and I would say that he was a man of absolute integrity. He believed absolutely that in 1960, on his first visit to Loch Ness, he did film part of a large animal. Now remember that he studied this object through binoculars before he then filmed it with his 16mm film camera. And he described it, I think, as resembling the back of a cow or a buffalo or something such as that.
He looked at the object first through binoculars, and what he saw was a sort of a triangular hump. And if you look at a rowing boat from the stern, that is what you see from height, because the bow is obviously pointed, and you're looking along the rowing boat from the stern. And the helmsman himself, for example, any figure in the boat, would blend with that image.
I've hundreds of times looked at objects on Loch Ness through binoculars, and you can tell if it's a boat. And with those 8 or 10 times magnification binoculars, one must suppose that he would have been able to distinguish between
a boat, a 14-foot boat, with people in it, which would be quite a recognizable and identifiable shape through binoculars, and what he saw and what he described, and having seen it, he then, of course, filmed it. And he filmed it going across the loch, and, of course, filmed it starting to submerge. Well, it's unlikely to have been a boat.
Dinsdale's film in 1960 sparked a new interest in the Loch Ness Monster, and an official organisation, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau, was formed, dedicated to discovering the truth. Throughout the 60s, enthusiastic amateurs, armed with cameras and long telephoto lenses, set out to secure conclusive proof of some unidentified creature in Loch Ness. But although the sightings continued unabated, in 10 years nobody was to film any evidence as convincing as Dinsdale's right at the start of the decade. Surface photography had failed, so in the 1970s the cameras went underwater. Adrian Shine led the way, testing a system in a nearby loch with clearer waters than Loch Ness. He endeavoured to film any creature silhouetted against the surface. But for the murky waters of Loch Ness, an American scientist, Dr. Robert Rhines, brought state-of-the-art underwater cameras married to a sonar system. The equipment was set up in the waters near Urquhart Bay, one of the deepest parts of Loch Ness, and the results seemed extraordinary.
Well, we submitted this to what we might say is an international jury of sonar experts and optical experts and photographic experts. And their unanimous agreement among the sonar people is that we did, in fact, detect large moving objects that seem to be from 20 to 30 feet long, seem to have an appendage that carries with the body of about 10 feet, and from the sonar signature indicates that they have humps or projections spaced about 6 feet apart. Here's a picture in color, true color, of the way it ordinarily looks, all that silt, and we get all this haze and fuzz. But fortunately, we did get something that looks very much like the tail of a newt, we are told, but very much larger, that's 8 feet long, that came into the camera. And our best picture, improved by enhancement, was of a flipper in a frame that was taken some 30 seconds earlier. And here you do see an appendage that the optical experts tell us is some 8 feet long and about 2 feet wide, and it coincided exactly with a 10-foot measurement on the sonar.
The extent to which these pictures were enhanced or retouched for magazine publication is now a matter of some controversy. The flipper shot does seem to mirror the popular image of a Loch Ness dinosaur, but it may be that these pictures show nothing more than the bottom of the loch. The gargoyle head could easily be an outcrop of rock, and the long head and neck might well be a submerged tree. For scientists to accept the existence of a large, unexplained creature in Loch Ness, sonar continues to be the best option. Trying to photograph anything clearly in the brown waters is out of the question. If a large anomaly could be repeatedly caught on sonar, then the basic scientific requirement of proving an assertion by repeating a result could be satisfied. It was this faith in sonar which brought about Operation Deep Scan in 1987.
Operation Deep Scan was a sort of a sonar curtain exercise involving a line of boats, each with an echo sounder, a very simple sonar, deliberately designed to be simple but large. Simple because it was necessary to send the beams straight down so that they weren't bent by thermal layers. We needed to know whether any of the previously gained sonar contacts were tethered debris, junk thrown overboard from trawlers, floats on bits of rope, that sort of thing. A lot of the contacts turned out to be just that. A lot of the contacts, when we revisited the locations, turned out to be fixed. There were 3 contacts that came out of Deep Scan that we couldn't explain in that way.
These anomalies were described by sonar engineer Darrell Lawrence as being animate objects smaller than a whale but larger than a shark. But again, the deep waters gave away none of their secrets. Until now, there has been a distinct scarcity of professional scientists at the loch investigating this greatest of mysteries. But in 1990, Nicholas Witchell spearheaded Project Urquhart. the first comprehensive program of scientific research at Loch Ness. Carrying the most sophisticated testing and monitoring equipment, they set out to scan the loch. Drawing together scientists from the Freshwater Biological Association and the Natural History Museum, Project Urquhart started to investigate how Loch Ness functions and what life it contains. For the first time, the largest body of fresh water in Britain was under the scrutiny of leading scientists.
The scientists are building up a picture of the food chain in the loch, and it will eventually be possible to say whether there are anomalies in that food chain. They can work out what is the theoretical fish population of Loch Ness based on the amount of plankton in the water. They can also determine, after careful study, what is the actual fish population of Loch Ness. If there is a discrepancy between the two, that would suggest that there is an anomaly in the food chain. It would suggest that there is something grazing on those fish.
At 7 p.m. on the 28th of July, Project Urquhart research vessel was travelling between Foyers and Fort Augustus. Behind the boat, at a depth of 20 meters, the submarine tracking sonar was in operation. Meanwhile, in the sonar room, Tor Edland was on duty when a large contact was picked up. It was so strong that it registered red on the sonar. It was tracked for 2 minutes. Then it disappeared.
There have been a number of unexplained sonar contacts in Loch Ness. Now, because Loch Ness is a very narrow basin, it is undoubtedly quite possible that some of these sonar contacts have been caused by wave formations or reverberations from the side walls of the loch. I say this with some hesitation because I am not clearly an electronics or a sonar expert, but all I can do is quote people who are electronics and sonar experts who have studied some of the contacts that have been obtained in Loch Ness, and they say that these are not false echoes. They are not, they say, echoes that could have been obtained, for example, from a shoal of fish, that they would appear to be echoes characteristic of echoes obtained from large underwater animate objects.
So, if there is a predator in the waters of the loch, what could it possibly be? Whatever it is, it's difficult to see how it could be any sort of dinosaur, since the whole loch was frozen over in the last ice age. Anything that lives here now must have come in the last 10,000 years. Known creatures in the loch have almost exclusively migrated from the sea. Reptiles could not survive in the cold waters. Mammals would need to come to the surface to breed, and so would be seen far more frequently. And there are no known marine amphibians that could have come from the sea. But what about fish?
There is a fish, interestingly enough, evolved in early Jurassic times, which is the sturgeon. In our case, the Baltic sturgeon. It's a very rare visitor to the British Isles. It comes into fresh water to spawn. And it wouldn't feed in fresh water. You see, the food resources in Loch Ness are so low, but it wouldn't have to deplete them. And sturgeon are very primitive-looking things, bony plates on the back, dorsal fin right back towards the tail, so you wouldn't recognize it as a fish. It's an upturned snout, if you want to perceive that as being perhaps seen as a long head and neck. It would come into the loch once in a blue moon, if you like. It wouldn't find a mate, and then it would go away again. And so, at the moment, today, that is my solution to what has happened here.
Is this really the face of the Loch Ness monster? The popular image remains that of a dinosaur with a long neck and a humped back. So where did this come from? Sailors have always reported sea serpents, dragons, and other monsters. Are we predisposed to seeing these particular shapes amid the confusion of light on water?
We have stood beside eyewitnesses and we have contrived events. And then we've asked the witness to describe, remember, recall, and draw what he may have seen. What is interesting is that actually there is a considerable difference, quite often, between what is actually out there on the water and what the observer draws. And that is simply due to the mechanisms of perception. Nobody comes here without some sort of a stereotype in their mind of what they are likely to see. And if they see something they do not understand, then that will begin in their perception to form into one of the well-known stereotypes.
I think there's no doubt that a large proportion of the people who believe that they have seen something unknown in Loch Ness are mistaken. It is quite easy to be confused by wave patterns and by commonplace objects in the loch, especially if you are looking out with great enthusiasm and half expecting to see something unusual. But I have, over 20 years, spoken and interviewed scores of people at Loch Ness who believe they have seen something unusual, and even if you discount 70, 80, even 90% of them as perhaps having been mistaken, you are still left with this body of eyewitness testimony, which I believe it is very arrogant to dismiss as unreliable, because having sat there, looked at those people straight in the eye and heard from their lips what they have seen, I would maintain that it is impossible to explain away some of the eyewitness testimony in terms of commonplace objects, in terms of dishonesty, in terms of people having been mistaken. And it is that eyewitness testimony which always, even when I'm feeling most cynical and suspicious about the whole Loch Ness thing, makes me just continue to wonder